All superpowers have a hangover effect. For example, after using super strength for the day, the morning after you can't even lift your spoon to eat your breakfast. You wake up one morning after using your own specific superpower, and you feel pretty hungover. The chair creaked as Michael was wheeled down the hallway, the tired slapping of his wife's bare feet echoing off the wooden walls. His hair was thin now, the few remaining strands too stubborn to fall. Too stubborn. That was what Christine had told him, as she had tried to persuade him from doing it. She still occasionally chastised him with those words, too stubborn. They would have all died, of course, so in the end it hadn't been a matter of being stubborn, it had been a matter of duty. Michael could still remember the first time his gift had been noticed. His mother had had a fever, and he, a young child, wet a flannel and pressed it against her forehead. He felt strange as the sickness was flushed from his mother and absorbed into his own skin, and could feel a tickle in his throat. His mom had gotten up an hour later. His mild cold lasted just over a day. Other heroes had mocked Michael the Miracle, their name, not his. What kind of hero has the power to make themselves sick? It's pathetic. He didn't ever get the glory, and in truth never thought himself a superhero. He had never leapt from building to building or freed children from an overturned bus. But he did mend their broken legs and necks as they lay crippled on the ground, at the cost of early-onset arthritis. The bouts would only ever last a few months, and then he'd be back in the dance halls with Christine, practicing for their wedding. The wedding that was always pushed back another month or two as they waited for Michael to heal fully. But there was always another injury to absorb, a sick child to help. It took 4 years in the end, and he'd barely been able to see his wife through hazy eyes as she'd walked down the aisle. The news had called it a dirty bomb. The city had been walled up. Any of the infected who tried to leave were shot. The virus couldn't be allowed to spread, even if it meant 500,000 dead. Stubborn, too stubborn to listen to his wife, to any of them. Michael had entered the city that no other superhero had dared to, the city of the diseased. One by one, the babies and children were brought to him. One by one, he healed them, even as his own body became irreparably damaged, as his cells fell apart like scrunched-up leaves. But they had lied to him. The government had promised him before he had entered that those he cured would be allowed to leave the city. They hadn't been. They worried that the virus could be lying dormant in those he'd helped. Inside Michael himself, too. Michael couldn't be allowed back out. The chair's wheels squeaked as Christine brought it to a stop. His wife opened the double doors ahead before walking back behind the chair and pushing Michael through. Christine had followed him into the city, cursing the country that had done this to her husband, to her. Michael would never forget that loyalty. The sun washed orange over the thousands of ragged teenagers who stood in front of them, guns and knives and other weapons held tight in their palms. The children he had saved. They were the only ones left alive in the rotting skeleton of the once great city. And they were here to see him. "You can do it," Christine whispered encouragingly. Michael wasn't sure. It was only in the last 2 years that he'd been able to leave his bed at all. This, although he'd practiced for months, terrified him. The thought of falling, of failing. But he wouldn't show his fear on his face. He refused to. His arms trembled as he pushed himself off his chair and staggered to his feet. The crowd erupted in joyous screams and celebratory gunfire. He would have made a speech to his army if his jaw hadn't been dangling impotently by his collarbone. He would have told them that he could feel the pull of the sicknesses swirling inside of him, demanding to be released. That he was a hero no longer, but instead the plague-bearer. He would have told them that their time had arrived and they were leaving the dying city, and that heroes and the government alike would pay dearly for what they had done, for abandoning them. These were promises he had made his wife 1,000 times in the last few years, and God knew he was too stubborn to do anything other than see them through. But he didn't need to tell the lost children any of this, for they all knew, and they were ready.